The hospital corridor smelled of antiseptic and despair, its walls closing in as Sarah hurried forward, clutching her chest with trembling hands. A nurse glanced away, avoiding her eyes, as though she already knew the weight of the truth that waited. Sarah pushed the door open, her breath catching at the sight of her son's still figure on the bed. The machines around him beeped faintly, their rhythm slowing, mocking her with each dying sound. A doctor stepped closer, his shoulders slumped as if burdened by a sentence too heavy to deliver. He whispered, "I'm sorry. There's nothing more we can do." Sarah's world shattered in an instant, her legs buckling as she fell to the cold floor, clutching the bed frame. Tears streamed down her face, her voice breaking in guttural sobs that filled the sterile room with unbearable grief. She reached for her son's hand, whispering, "I promised I'd protect you. I promised." But her words dissolved into the silence. Every breath she took was laced with anguish, every heartbeat screaming against the cruel truth that she had failed to keep the promise that defined her existence. The hallway outside the room felt colder than ice as Sarah stumbled out, her legs unsteady as though the ground rejected her weight. Her cries echoed, drawing whispers from strangers who dared not meet her gaze. She leaned against the wall, clutching her chest, her sobs muffled against her sleeve. A nurse approached gently, her hand reaching out, but Sarah pulled away, shaking her head violently. "Don't," Sarah whispered, her voice raw. "Don't touch me." The nurse froze, helpless, and stepped back into the shadows. Sarah slid down the wall, burying her face in her hands, whispering over and over, "I promised. I promised." Her words became a broken mantra, filling the hallway with unbearable sorrow. The world beyond the hospital doors was drowned in rain, the sky torn open with relentless downpour. Sarah staggered outside, the storm soaking her clothes instantly, clinging to her body like chains. She tilted her face upward, rain mixing with her tears, her lips trembling with silent screams. A car honked in the distance, headlights slicing through the rain, but she didn't move. She stood still, arms hanging limp, her body trembling as if the storm itself carried her grief. "Why him?" she whispered to the night, her voice stolen by thunder. Sarah's car sat alone in the parking lot, windows blurred with rain, her trembling hands gripping the steering wheel. Her reflection in the mirror showed hollow eyes, drained of all light. She whispered, "I should have done more. I should have saved him." The rain pounded on the roof, each drop a cruel reminder of time running out. Her sobs echoed in the confined space, and she pressed her forehead against the steering wheel, shattering into another wave of grief. The world outside blurred through Sarah's tear-filled eyes as she started the car, engine humming softly under the storm's roar. She drove slowly, every streetlight casting haunting shadows across her face. Her hands trembled on the wheel, her body numb. Her son's laughter echoed in her memory, stabbing her heart with each fleeting sound. She whispered into the dark, "I broke my promise, and I don't know how to live with it." The words dissolved into silence, carried away by the rain hammering the windshield. The morning light filtered weakly through the blinds, painting faint stripes across Sarah's empty living room. She sat slumped on the couch, clutching her son's small blanket tightly against her chest. The silence of the house pressed down on her, making every breath heavy, every heartbeat unbearable. The clock ticked loudly, its rhythm cruelly reminding her of time that no longer belonged to him. Her phone buzzed on the table, but she ignored it, unable to face voices filled with pity. Sarah whispered to herself, "I can't do this. I can't live in this world without him." Her body trembled as the words left her lips, and her eyes wandered to the family photos framed on the wall. Each picture seemed to laugh at her pain, frozen smiles that mocked the emptiness echoing inside her chest. She buried her face in the blanket and let out a muffled scream, drowning in the weight of her broken promise. Later that day, Sarah wandered into the kitchen, the sink filled with dishes untouched since the hospital. The smell of stale coffee clung to the air, and she stared blankly at the counter where her son once sat, swinging his legs. The memory crashed into her, His laughter, his little voice asking for cereal, and the silence that followed felt like a blade twisting deeper. She grabbed a glass, her hand trembling until it slipped and shattered against the floor. Pieces scattered everywhere, but she didn't flinch. She dropped to her knees, whispering, "I promised I'd never let you go hungry. I promised." Her hands hovered over the shards, her reflection fractured in each broken piece. Sarah's phone buzzed again, this time flashing the name of her best friend, Claire. For a moment, Sarah thought about ignoring it, but her trembling hands reached out and pressed answer. "Sarah." Claire's voice cracked through the receiver, filled with quiet concern. Sarah could barely find her voice, whispering, "I can't breathe. It hurts so much." Claire held her silence for a moment before replying softly, "You don't have to go through this alone. I'm here." Sarah's tears rolled faster, guilt and gratitude mixing in her chest. "I don't know how to live without him, Claire," she confessed, clutching the phone as if it could anchor her. Claire arrived an hour later, her footsteps soft but steady as she entered the silent home. She found Sarah curled on the couch, blanket clutched against her chest like a lifeline. Claire knelt beside her, her arms wrapping Sarah in a quiet embrace. Sarah broke instantly, sobbing into her friend's shoulder, her voice muffled as she cried, "I failed him, Claire. I failed my own son." Claire whispered firmly, "No, you loved him more than anything. That was never a failure." The words sank into Sarah's shattered soul, not healing the wound but keeping her from collapsing further into the abyss. Hours later, Sarah sat with Claire at the kitchen table, 2 untouched cups of tea steaming faintly between them. Claire held Sarah's hands firmly, grounding her as Sarah whispered, "I made him a promise I couldn't keep. I swore I'd protect him no matter what. And now he's gone." Claire's eyes glistened with tears, but her voice remained steady. "You gave him love, Sarah. That's more powerful than any promise." Sarah shook her head, staring at the table as if searching for an answer etched into the wood. The silence stretched, but Claire didn't let go, her presence a fragile thread holding Sarah together. The bills piled on the kitchen counter, their edges curled and stained by untouched coffee cups. Sarah sat staring at them, her fingers trembling as she held the latest hospital invoice. The numbers blurred through her tears, each digit a reminder of the cost she could never pay. Her chest ached with the weight of failure, and she whispered to herself, "I can't keep this up. I can't fight this alone." Memories of her son's laughter filled her ears like echoes of a life stolen too soon, pushing her deeper into despair. The house felt suffocating, the silence broken only by the creak of the old ceiling fan. Every bill seemed to mock her, shouting promises she could not keep, and her heart twisted with unbearable guilt. That evening, Sarah answered the knock at the door to find Mark, her estranged ex-husband, standing in the rain with his jacket soaked. His eyes carried a guilt she didn't trust, and her stomach churned at the sight of him. "You shouldn't be here," she snapped, but his voice was steady, almost rehearsed. "I heard about our son. I thought you might need help." Sarah's fury boiled instantly, her grief sharpening into anger. "Where were you when he needed you? Where were you when I begged you to stay?" The rain dripped from his hair as he stood silent. Shame etched across his face, yet still he lingered like a storm she couldn't push away. Inside, the silence between Sarah and Mark was deafening. He sat stiffly at the edge of the couch, while she stood with folded arms glaring. "You think you can just show up now?" she hissed. Mark lowered his head, whispering, "I failed too, Sarah. I left when I shouldn't have." Her chest heaved, torn between fury and the faintest sting of truth. She wanted to scream, to drive him out, but her voice cracked instead. "I promised him I'd protect him, and I couldn't. You don't get to walk in here and act like you care now." Mark's hands clenched as his jaw tightened, yet he stayed silent, the shame drowning his excuses. The argument rose like thunder, their words colliding in painful bursts. Sarah's voice cracked as she shouted, "You left me to carry this burden alone." Mark fired back, "I was broken too, Sarah. You think it didn't destroy me?" Their pain filled the room, two broken souls colliding under the weight of their shared loss. She pointed toward the photos on the wall, her finger trembling. He needed you, Mark. And you weren't here. His eyes followed her gesture, tears pooling in his own. I know, and I will never forgive myself. The raw confession left them both trembling, their anger collapsing into silence heavy with grief. Later, after the shouting had drained them both, Sarah sank into the couch, exhausted and hollow. Mark sat across from her, his face pale, his voice barely above a whisper. I don't expect forgiveness, but let me help you, please. Sarah turned her face away, her eyes fixed on the empty hallway that once echoed with her son's footsteps. Help? You can't give me what I lost. You can't bring him back. Mark's hands shook as he leaned forward, his voice trembling. I just want to try, Sarah. For him. Her chest tightened, torn between rejecting him and recognizing the sincerity in his broken tone. The conflict only deepened the ache in her heart, leaving her unable to answer. Sarah sat on the edge of her bed, the night swallowing her room in shadows. Bills, letters, and unopened envelopes lay scattered across the floor like reminders of battles she was losing. Her hands clutched her head as she whispered, I can't hold this together. Memories of her son's laughter filled the silence, each echo dragging her deeper into despair. She thought of Mark's words, his plea to help, and the anger burned like fire in her chest. Where was he when I needed him? She muttered, her voice shaking. The walls felt like they were closing in, and Sarah pressed her palms against her face as if to shield herself from her own thoughts. The storm inside her heart roared louder than the night outside, leaving her trembling, broken, and lost. Claire arrived the next morning, her face drawn with worry, as she found Sarah still in the same clothes, eyes hollow and unfocused. Sarah, you can't go on like this, Claire said gently, placing a hand on her shoulder. Sarah's voice cracked. I don't know how to keep breathing when everything inside me has died. Claire knelt beside her, tears in her own eyes as she whispered, You're still here. That matters. But Sarah shook her head, pushing her hand away, her voice rising. I don't matter without him. Nothing does. The words cut through the room, leaving Claire stunned, her silence echoing with her own helpless grief. Later, Sarah found herself at her son's empty room, the door creaking as she pushed it open. The air smelled faintly of crayons and dust, untouched since the hospital. Toys lay neatly on shelves, his small shoes tucked under the bed, frozen in time. She stepped inside, her knees buckling as she sat on the edge of his bed, pulling his pillow close. The faint scent of him clung to the fabric, tearing her heart apart. I should have protected you, she whispered, her tears soaking the pillow. Every corner of the room reminded her of promises broken, each object screaming of a life cut too short. The silence pressed against her ears, loud and unbearable, as she curled into the bed, clutching the last pieces of him. The knock on the door startled Sarah from her grief. When she opened it, Mark stood there again, this time with an envelope in his hand. I can help with the bills, he said softly, his eyes filled with guilt. Sarah's anger surged, her voice sharp as a blade. Do you think money will fix what you destroyed? Mark flinched, lowering his gaze, but didn't leave. It won't fix the past, he admitted, but maybe it can ease some of the weight you carry. Sarah's chest heaved with fury, her tears burning her eyes. The only weight I carry is his absence, and you can't buy your way out of that. Her words sliced through the silence, leaving Mark trembling on the doorstep, his presence unwelcome yet unshakable. That night, Sarah sat alone at the kitchen table, the envelope Mark had left unopened in front of her. Her fingers traced its edges, torn between pride and desperation. The ticking clock filled the silence, each second heavier than the last. She whispered, I can't do this alone, though the words barely left her lips. The house felt emptier than ever, shadows creeping in around her like ghosts of her past. She lowered her head onto the table, her tears dripping onto the paper. The envelope remained sealed, a symbol of the conflict tearing her apart, her anger at Mark and her need to survive. With every tear, Sarah felt herself unravel further, drowning in the storm of guilt, rage, and helplessness. Sarah sat across from Mark at the kitchen table, the unopened envelope still between them. His hands trembled as he pushed it closer, but her eyes burned with suspicion. "Why are you really here, Mark?" she demanded. His lips parted, but he hesitated, eyes darting to the floor. "There's something you don't know," he whispered. Her breath caught, anger and fear tangling together. "What could you possibly tell me now that would change anything?" Mark swallowed hard, guilt pouring from his expression. "I should have told you before. His sickness wasn't just fate." The words struck her like lightning, her world tilting violently as the implication settled in. Sarah's voice rose sharply, breaking the silence. "What are you saying?" Mark's hands clenched tighter, his face pale. "It wasn't random. His illness, it was caused by exposure. I should have stopped it." Sarah's chest heaved, her knuckles white as she gripped the table edge. "Stop what? Stop who?" Mark's eyes finally met hers, shimmering with tears. "My company knew the chemicals near the playground were dangerous. I knew. And I said nothing." The truth crashed down on her, the betrayal cutting deeper than any knife. Her son's laughter, his sickness, his death, all tied to the silence of the man sitting before her. Sarah shot to her feet, her chair screeching against the floor. Her voice cracked, rage erupting like fire. "You knew? You knew and you let him play there?" Mark's tears fell freely now, his words stumbling. "I thought they would fix it, Sarah. I thought it wasn't as dangerous as they said." Her body trembled, fists clenched as her sobs turned into furious cries. "You killed him with your silence." Her words echoed like thunder in the small kitchen, shaking both of them to their core. Mark lowered his head, broken, whispering, "I never forgave myself." But Sarah's fury was unstoppable, fueled by betrayal. Sarah's knees buckled, and she sank back into her chair, her body shaking as tears streamed uncontrollably. "He trusted you," she whispered, voice hollow. Mark reached across the table, but she jerked back as if his touch burned. "Don't," she spat, her chest heaving. His face twisted in anguish as he pleaded, "I wanted to tell you, but I was a coward. I thought I was protecting you." Her laughter came out bitter and broken. "Protecting me? You destroyed me. You destroyed him." The weight of betrayal pressed against the air, suffocating them both, the silence between their words screaming louder than their voices. The house felt smaller, the walls pressing in as Sarah whispered to herself, "I promised to protect him, and I failed." Mark buried his face in his hands, his voice breaking. "It was my fault, not yours." But Sarah shook her head violently, her eyes blazing with grief and fury. "No, Mark, it was both of us. We both failed him." The admission tore through her chest, leaving her gasping. Silence filled the kitchen, broken only by the sound of their sobs. The truth hung heavy in the air, a wound that could never heal, a betrayal that reshaped everything Sarah thought she knew. Sarah paced the living room, her hands shaking as Mark followed quietly, his face pale with regret. She spun around, her voice sharp with fury. "You took his life from me before death did. You knew, and you stayed silent." Mark stepped forward, his own voice cracking. "I thought I was protecting you. I was wrong." She jabbed a finger at him, rage flooding her chest. "Protecting me? You murdered his childhood." The words shook the air, leaving them both trembling. Mark's eyes brimmed with tears, his hands reaching helplessly. "Please, let me carry this with you." Sarah's face twisted in anguish, the rage colliding with grief so deep she felt herself unraveling. Her voice broke as she collapsed into the couch, burying her face in her hands. "I promised him I'd keep him safe, and I failed." The words echoed like glass shattering. Mark knelt in front of her, desperation pouring from his eyes. "It wasn't you, Sarah. It was me. I failed both of you." She raised her head, her eyes blazing. "You let poison seep into his lungs. You watched while he got sicker." Mark's voice faltered as he whispered, "I know. And I hate myself every day." The confession filled the room with heavy silence, broken only by Sarah's ragged breaths. Sarah's grief turned to fire again as she shoved Mark backward. He stumbled, crashing into the coffee table, his hands scraping against the wood. "Get out!" she screamed, her throat raw. Mark pushed himself up, voice breaking. "I'll leave if you want, but please, don't carry this alone." Sarah's chest heaved, her body shaking with rage. "Alone is all I have now. Alone is what you left me with." Mark's face crumbled, his voice a whisper. "I lost him too." The words hung in the air, fragile but heavy, piercing Sarah's heart in ways her rage couldn't protect against. For the first time, Sarah saw his pain mirrored in his face. His voice shook as he said, "Every night I see him in my dreams, and I wake up choking on the guilt." Tears streamed down Sarah's cheeks as she clutched her chest. "I don't want your guilt, Mark. I wanted my son." The words sliced like knives, filling the room with unbearable silence. Mark reached for her hand but froze halfway, his body trembling. "Let me take some of this weight," he begged. Sarah pulled her hand back, her sobs tearing through the air. "It's mine to carry. It's mine." The confrontation reached its breaking point as Sarah stood, her body shaking, her voice a raw cry. "I don't know if I can forgive you. I don't know if I ever will." Mark stood too, his shoulders heavy, tears cutting paths down his cheeks. "Then let me bear your hate. If that's all you can give me, I'll take it." The words froze Sarah in place, her heart split between rage and the faint flicker of something else, release. Her tears fell faster as she whispered, "You'll never understand the weight I carry." Mark's reply was almost silent, "I'll never stop trying." The moment hung suspended, both of them broken, yet tethered by the pain of the same loss. The house was still, shadows stretching long across the living room as Sarah sat alone, her hands wrapped around her son's blanket. The air felt heavy, but softer than before, as if grief itself had grown tired. Mark had left hours earlier, his words still echoing, a mixture of guilt and desperate hope. Sarah whispered into the silence, "I don't know how to forgive, but I can't drown here forever." Her voice trembled, breaking as tears welled again, but this time they carried a quiet exhaustion rather than rage. She pressed the blanket to her face, inhaling the fading scent of her boy, letting herself feel both the agony of loss and the fragile thread of love that still tied her to him. The following morning, Sarah stood in her son's empty room, the curtains swaying gently with the breeze from an open window. Dust particles floated in the light, giving the air a fragile glow. She traced her fingers across the toys lined neatly on the shelf, pausing at his favorite car, the paint chipped from years of play. Her chest ached, but instead of collapsing, she allowed herself to whisper, "You are still with me." For the first time, the words didn't feel like a desperate plea, but a truth she could hold on to. The silence remained, but it no longer crushed her, it simply lingered, like a memory. Later that day, Claire sat with Sarah on the porch, the sun dipping low as evening shadows stretched across the yard. Claire's voice was gentle, her hand resting firmly on Sarah's arm. "You're stronger than you think. He would want you to live, not just survive." Sarah closed her eyes, the truth settling inside her like a seed planted in soil. "I promised to protect him," she whispered. Claire replied, her own eyes shimmering. "And you did. You gave him love, Sarah. That's more than any promise." Sarah's tears fell again, but this time her chest loosened, her sobs quiet rather than shattering. As night returned, Sarah lit a single candle in the kitchen, placing it beside a framed photo of her son. The flame flickered gently, its glow wrapping the room in fragile warmth. She whispered, "I couldn't keep my promise, but I will carry you with me always." Her fingers traced the glass frame, her face softening with both sorrow and peace. The tears streamed, but her breathing was steadier, her shoulders lighter. She stood still for a long moment, watching the flame dance, as though her son's spirit lingered in the light. The silence no longer screamed. It whispered gently, reminding her she was not completely alone. In her bedroom, Sarah lay under the blankets, the small blue one tucked close to her chest. Moonlight poured through the window, silvering her tear-stained face. She whispered into the stillness, "I would do it all again. For you, I would." Her voice cracked, but her lips curved in the faintest smile, a fragile balance between sorrow and love. As her eyes closed, exhaustion wrapped her body, and for the first time in weeks, she allowed herself to drift toward sleep. The night was silent, yet her heart carried the echo of her son's laughter, not as pain, but as memory. And though broken, she knew she would rise again.